Hello and welcome to episode 15 of the JokerOutSubs podcast. Today I will be reading an interview with Kris Guštin for the Elle men's special. He was interviewed by Ida Gregorz with photos provided by Urša Premik and styling by Alenka Birk. Elle men's special, a fashion odyssey with Kris Guštin. With Kris Guštin, the music author and guitarist of Joker Out, we escaped to another side of music, and with that to his other passion. We talked about style and everything connected to it. There will also be no shortage of this in the band's third album titled Souvenir Pop, which is released on the 15th of November, 1 week after the issue of Elle you're holding now. How perfectly synchronised we are. At Ljubljana's Moderna Cafe, on a fresh but lovely autumn Tuesday when everyone's still at work or in school, he arrives in a dark green jacket with a checkered pattern, awesome trousers, and her necklace. This time, the menu is not serving music and life, but matcha and all things fashion. I'm in a regular trench coat and a white t-shirt, but luckily he doesn't judge people by their style. Instead, the style might be what piques his interest to converse, if it's good, of course. Besides, he's the one being interviewed. So let's begin. Interviewer: when did you first discover your personal style or the field of fashion? Was it in childhood or a bit later? Kris: I roughly divide my life into 2 periods, before I first held a guitar and after. When I really got into playing and ventured into music, my world opened up in all areas. Discovering fashion definitely falls into this second period, so the post-high school era. To be completely honest, my style in high school wasn't something I'm particularly proud of today, brackets laughs. My girlfriend and I still have a photo of me wearing cargo pants and a black sweater, which is proof she truly loves me, since that look was far from the best choice, brackets laughs. Interviewer: when did it evolve from just an aesthetic impression to self-expression? Kris: my first contact with fashion as a form of art or expression was during our band's first music video or fashion shoot, when I realised that this is also something you need to consider as a musician. At first it seemed to me like a fairly peripheral element, but as our career developed and we met new people who gave us more insight into this, I began to understand its significance, what I could personally gain from it, and what we as a band could gain. This quickly developed into standard practice. I was increasingly exposed to fashion. We had more and more costume rehearsals and stylings, and 2 years ago we even got our first proper stylist. And then I really committed to it at around 19 or 20. Before that, my philosophy was always to just wear whatever I first find in the closet. But then I shifted to, I'll wear things that would make me stand out from others, but this process was a long one. Interviewer: so your style development with the band inspired your personal growth too? I've always wondered if a young person is compelled to mature in every area when so many big things happen all at once, as they did for you. Kris: maybe you do grow old in terms of personality sooner. Yes, at first I wanted and still want to primarily express the difference or uniqueness that I feel inside myself through music. But then I discovered that this goes very much hand in hand with fashion, so I started looking for my expression there as well. Today, it's almost an equally important part of my day. Interviewer: which fashion ideas or directions attract you? You've probably encountered a lot of inspiration during your travels on tour, right? Kris: definitely, but speaking purely origin-wise, I think I'm just like any other rock musician. We draw from the rock aesthetic of the 60s and 70s, which was also very in when my fashion awareness was born. Back then, around 2016 to 2018, there were a lot of flamboyant shirts on the music scene, with a slight hippie influence, which was the starting point. Only later did I start getting interested in slightly more modern clothes. When I was younger, I found myself in street fashion, that sort of Eminem-esque hip-hop vibe, so very baggy clothes, which I then began to reject when I made the shift towards the 60s and a slightly psychedelic aesthetic. It makes perfect sense, as humans tend to jump between extremes. When I had worked through that style, I started discovering the aesthetics of the 80s and late 90s, which was also reflected in music at the time. The best example that comes to mind is Dua Lipa's previous album, which was in the style of the new 80s, and the fashion matched that as well. Today, the early 2000s style has come back, but I haven't fully decided whether I like it or not. As a musician, I was of course initially inspired by other music groups. Arctic Monkeys were a big inspiration for us, both musically and visually, as was the whole British rock scene, including bands like the Kooks and Oasis. That entire aesthetic has always been strongly present with us. I doubt there's a single inspiration board at our shoots that doesn't include a photo of one of those bands or, for instance, the Beatles. And that aesthetic has always been close to my heart too. Interviewer: rockers have always been associated with more masculine fashion elements, while in recent years, many male musicians have been experimenting with more feminine style elements, for example, Harry Styles and Lenny Kravitz. David Bowie was already the one who back then started to blur these fashion boundaries. You too wear such pieces and dare to stand out with them. Kriss: it happened quite naturally, as the stylists we worked with always chose slightly more German clothing for me. This doesn't necessarily mean women's clothing, but rather somewhat more androgynous pieces, which I quickly embraced. I found them interesting and appealing because there's a lot of fresh expression in that style that I don't find in traditional men's clothing, though I don't want to overdo it. I also started experimenting with them personally, choosing many more varied colours. For a while I was very fond of pink, and lately I've been playing around with orange. On the cover of the album Demoni, I wore an orange-pink sweater. Interviewer: are we, as an audience here, already mature enough for a musician to present his feminine side through fashion? Does that require courage? Kriss: it does. There will always be people who won't understand you. But for me, when it comes to the stage or a shoot, I'll wear anything, and if I feel good in it, I don't worry about what someone thinks. When I walk around in civilian clothes, however, especially in Ljubljana, I'm still aware if I'm dressed somewhat untraditionally. There's a certain boundary that I still need to break within myself. On stage, it's easier because it's not necessarily 100% my expression. I'm playing a certain character, but personally, sometimes I do need some courage to show up in a particular style. However, the awareness of being different is stronger in Ljubljana than in other parts of the Western world. For example, I never felt that way in London, but still our capital isn't the worst when it comes to this. Interviewer: speaking of influences, what about other artistic or cultural movements? Kriss: I love Art Deco, the aesthetics of the 20s and 30s, though it doesn't influence my daily life. In terms of photography, Damon Baker's black and white style is beautiful. The vintage camera aesthetic has recently won me over, which will also be reflected in our band. Musically over the past year, I've been listening to old Italian chansons and older French music, chansons as well, so I'm clearly feeling very retro this year, brackets, smile. Interviewer: will the third album visually stand out from the previous ones then? Kriss: yes, it will be very different. In the last two we used a lot of colours, but there won't be as many in this one. Interviewer: style can be an excellent tool for expressing an artist's authenticity, but with increasing success, the artist can also become its slave. The line is thin. Do you ever feel the pressure of having to express your fashion style in your private life as well? Kriss: no, I've never felt like my style owns me. It's always been the opposite. I've always felt like I want more, like I want to dress even better than the day before, especially when it comes to my music career. Perhaps style only hangs over my head a bit when I have no inspiration and would rather wear sweatpants on an ordinary relaxed day. There's nothing wrong with that, of course, but then I do think about what would happen if I ended up somewhere in the middle of the city dressed like that. Interviewer: it seems that Joker Out has developed a distinct style despite outside influences. Kriss: yes, today we are already very complete in our style. Others have definitely had an influence on us, and I think it's great that each of them tried to express themselves through us. It was interesting to experience how Joker Out was seen by Ponorelli and how Andras Drobnic or Carlo Chieri did. Of course, there is a difference in this, but it also aligns with the development of our music and aesthetics, so all these influences are very welcome. Interviewer: how much of your personal fashion identity is therefore reflected in Joker Out? Kriss: maybe, as someone who is not an external observer, I can't answer that. But I can say that I was always one of the first to give feedback to the stylists when we were creating our outfits, approving mood boards and so on. So I've definitely shaped our style in a direction that suits me. On certain blind stylings when we just dressed up, I quickly threw something on myself and then helped look for pieces for the other band members. Interviewer: what about this photo shoot where Alenka Birk took over the styling? Did you let her take the lead with her tactics, or did you collaborate on the fashion choices? How did the communication go? Kriss: I didn't know Alenka, who, by the way, is an excellent stylist, before. She was recommended by Ursha, the photographer. Later she confided in me that she had also worked with my father. Alenka focuses on elegant men's fashion, which is a departure from this more fluid fashion, and this suited me because I'd never really been photographed in a men's suit, jacket and tie. I wanted to try something new. I hadn't seen the outfits before the day of the photo shoot when we met in her small studio in the morning. There were 9 of them in total, and we only swapped out a piece or 2 in at most 3 of the looks. Interviewer: this is more of an exception than a rule in fashion photo shoots. Does that mean you felt good in them? Kriss: yes. In some more so, obviously, but in others, you have to trust the people you're working with. When I first look in the mirror, I always keep in mind that if something isn't optimal, it doesn't mean it won't work well on camera. Even if the pants are too short or creased, it's still worth photographing them because the photo can be edited later, whereas on stage it's a different story and everything has to already be perfect in the mirror. Working with Alenka was very simple, we clicked really well, and I will definitely work with her again. Interviewer: how linked are your confidence and the way you feel on stage with your styling? Kriss: very connected. As a musician, you want to enjoy yourself as much as possible on stage, and the people who come to listen to you and pay for the ticket deserve to see you at your best, which means you have to feel good in every aspect. Interviewer: you recently attended Ljubljana Fashion Week. Which of the local fashion designers do you like to follow? Kriss: as far as the Slovenian fashion scene is concerned, I'm still quite the beginner, so I only knew the designers we'd worked with. This was my first time visiting Fashion Week. Interviewer: which shows did you watch? Kriss: on the first day, all of them. I didn't like everything, but what stuck in my mind was Sari Valenci, with their somewhat country club, Lana Del Rey vibe, and golf moment. I also really enjoyed the Belgrade Fashion Week, as there was an obvious Balkan touch, which I would love to see more of in Slovenia. Interviewer: you're a fan of vintage clothes and second-hand shops. What do these pieces have for you that new ones don't? Kriss: honestly, I don't know if there's an objective explanation why. I started getting into it because it was popular, and at the same time, it gives you the feeling of getting a more unique piece. At the same time, you're shopping sustainably and not contributing to the production of unnecessary new textiles on Earth, which is great, but I'd be lying if I said that's my main motivation. What I like the most is the experience of flipping through clothes where each piece is different, like a treasure hunt, compared to regular stores where you flip through the same clothes in different sizes. Interviewer: did your mum, who came from the Netherlands, where people have been aware of this for many years, introduce you to this concept? Kriss: I wouldn't say we talked much about it at home, but I literally lived it. This is probably true for Slovenians in general. Almost all the clothes I had as a child were from older peers, or I would take something from my dad too. When I was done with wearing the clothes, my brother would wear them too. Every piece of clothing that came into our house was passed around, which is a great practice, and it's still like that today. My sister stole half of my sweaters, my mum sometimes takes things too. Max borrows jackets from my dad, which I've also done myself. It's like we all share one big closet. Brackets, laughs. Interviewer: so you've influenced each other's style in your family, or rather, you still do so. Who has otherwise had the most influence on your style in the past, and who does today? Kriss: I don't remember ever looking at my parents as role models in this regard, but I didn't really think about it back then, but they definitely influenced me at least subconsciously. When I see how my mum dresses today, I see parallels with my own style, so she probably did influence me, perhaps more than my dad. As for street style, which I mentioned at the beginning, it might have been inherited from my uncle, my aunt's husband from the Netherlands, who wore loose sweaters and listened to hip-hop. My mum also had an uncle from the Indonesian side of the family whom I never met, but he was very eccentric. Some of his clothes made their way to us over the years, and when I looked at these pieces in the closet, I was fascinated by how they reflected his personality. Asian fashion became a bit closer to me because of this, and I might even explore it someday. Interviewer: the heart necklace you wear all the time, even today, is from your girlfriend. Do you ever dress your girlfriend, or does she dress you? Kriss: my girlfriend is very fashion-oriented and has played a big role in my fashion development. She's always encouraged me when I tried new clothes that at the time seemed more radical to me. In this way, she partially shaped me. We also really enjoy shopping together. She dresses me more often than I dress her, which means I ask for her opinion. There have also been times when we've dressed the same when it comes to basic pieces. We've never really styled each other, but there will probably be time for that in the future. Interviewer: where do you like to go for vintage pieces in Ljubljana? Did you find any gems while on tour across Europe? Kriss. Textile house vintage shop is, in my opinion, by far the best in Ljubljana. The next one is Humana on Stritarjeva Street, where I find something every now and again. Abroad, we visited many vintage shops in Dublin, Paris and London. In the latter, I always go to Brick Lane, which is a street with vintage shops in the east side of central London, where the more hipster area starts. The downside is that it quickly becomes quite an expensive experience. Interviewer. What kind of information can you deduce about a person based on what they're wearing? Who, in your opinion, is truly well dressed? Kriss. A person's style is never a reason not to engage in conversation with them, but it is a very strong stimulator of my interest in that person. If I think someone is really well dressed, I automatically assume that they might think similarly to me and be interested in the same artistic, musical, or visual directions, so I'm more eager to talk to them. However, I've often met people who didn't seem interestingly dressed and later realised they were amazing people, even if they dressed completely casually. Interviewer. Your audience expresses itself very differently in terms of fashion, as your parents also mentioned in a recent interview for Elle. How do you as a band perceive this? Kriss. Yes, what they meant was that it is no longer the case that you have to be appropriately dressed for a rock concert. When we observe the audience from the stage, I would say that the most typical thing for our time is that we are no longer genre-bound, not just musically but also in terms of fashion. 30 or 40 years ago, you would see people at a rock concert in leather jackets, black shoes and jeans, and that was it. Today, you have flamboyant outfits with blue and green hair in one corner, gothic style in another, and of course people in simple t-shirts and pants somewhere in the middle. And no one feels like they don't belong. Everyone sings our songs, and that's really nice. Thanks for listening. For the original translation and many more translations, check us out on X, TikTok, Tumblr, Facebook and Instagram under the name JokerOutSubs.